I traveled to Poland to expose a charlatan, a prophet who claimed he could give ordinary people superpowers. He said he could control his body temperature at will, hijack his immune system, and conquer the world's tallest mountains with no cold weather gear. I'd built my career as an investigative journalist debunking people like him. But to prove he was a liar or a madman, I had to try his method. I'm not an athlete, I'm not exceptional, but I found a power that I never knew humans had. I hiked to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro without a shirt. I sat on the snowy bank of a river until the ice melted around me. I trained with top athletes. I crossed the finish line of the world's most notorious cold weather obstacle course race wearing nothing but shorts and a smile. I could do 80 push-ups on a single breath, and I lost 7 pounds of fat in 7 days. If I can do it, anyone can.
Well, this is Margaret Schlachter. I am here from Mud Run Guide with Scott Carney, the author of the new book, What Doesn't Kill Us. So, Scott, thanks so much for taking some time this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I see we have the same microphone.
I know. This is great. You went and investigated Wim Hof and this cold exposure that it seems to be everywhere these days. It's like exploded all of a sudden again. So can you kind of talk about why you decided to research the cold and this guy Wim Hof and how this all came about and this started?
Well, it started from this actually a very skeptical place. My career as an anthropologist and investigative journalist, I started by this terrible event that happened in my life. I was getting my PhD in anthropology. And I was sort of between the dissertation, sort of in the middle of the dissertation research, and I ended up leading an abroad program for American college students in North India. We were traveling around the holy sites. We started in Delhi, went to Varanasi, and then down to Bodh Gaya, which is the place where the Buddha attained enlightenment about 2,800 years ago. And there's we did this 10-day silent meditation retreat. And on this retreat, we're talking about enlightenment, we're talking about nirvana and, sort of the powers you can accumulate through meditation. But we're totally silent at this time. It's only a nun talking to us. At the end of the retreat, my best student, a woman named Emily O'Connor, was sort of enraptured by these ideas. She'd been doing yoga for years. She was the most, put together, smartest, beautifulest, the sort of the star student of the group. And then she climbed up to the roof of the retreat center the last night, about 3 a.m, and jumped off the roof to her death, committing suicide on this retreat. And it was the most horrible thing that I've ever gone through. And as the leader of the program, I needed to sort of run the investigation, get her body back to the United States. And in the process, I read her journal. And in her journal, the last words were, "I am a bodhisattva," which means I am essentially enlightened. I am an angel. And all I need to do is leave my body to get there. And this horrible thing that happened, right, it led me down this sort of long investigative career where I started looking at how people who are pursuing superpowers through spiritual means can sometimes end in very, very dark places. I wrote a book called The Death on Diamond Mountain, where I looked at the story of one man who died while meditating in the mountains of Arizona, being taken advantage of by this Tibetan guru named Michael Roach. So this is the preface. This is the years before I get to Wim. And I hear about Wim, and he's essentially trying to give people superpowers. In the yogic traditions, they're called siddhis, and they're actually in the Yoga Sutras. And he's saying he can heat his body at will, he can control his immune system, he can do all these crazy feats, and that he can teach you to do it. And I was sure that he was going to get people killed, like so many of these gurus do. So I flew out to meet him in Poland in 2012, in January 2012. And my plan was to debunk him. And I was sure he was like this. But as an anthropologist, as an investigative journalist, I have to give my sources a fair shot. So I tried his method. And it worked. In a matter of days, I was standing in the snow for like an hour at a time. I was sweating. We hiked up this mountain in Poland in just a bathing suit and hiking boots. I was sweating the whole time. It was like 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And I was just so shocked by how rapidly my body adapted that I knew I had to write a book about this, because this is really cool, right? It's really cool. I was so surprised. We do there's this push-up and breathing routine where you hyperventilate and you hold your breath, you hyperventilate and you hold your breath. And I was holding my breath for like 5 minutes at a time. I usually could do 20 push-ups, but then I was doing his method. I was doing 40 push-ups, but I wasn't breathing. I had no air in my lungs. I mean, it seemed like magic. And
I think you even don't you write at one point you did 80 push-ups? I think at one point in the book you did 80 push-ups, and as somebody that's also kind of going through this currently, like I can attest to this too. It's you're not like some anomaly, because like I'm doing it as well, and before I could do like 15 maybe push-ups or whatever, and I just did 50 this morning without breathing. So
it's not shocking, right? It's shocking, but once you start doing it, you're like, oh, 80, that's fine. I know people who could do 100. Like, it's not crazy. Although when I did do 80, I will have to point out, I was using a slightly different technique. Usually you do these breath out push-ups. I was doing breath in, so I had full lungs. And then when I hit 80, I passed out and nailed my head on the floor and got a bruise. So I found my limit. I know where my limit is, guys. But you're able to summon this strength. And, to take a little tangent here, it works really well with HIIT workouts, like the high intensity interval training. Like you get that much more boost. And if you can find an exercise that works with HIIT, then you can be training at like 104 or 107%. And isn't that cool?
It's unbelievable. And it seems like, because I've now read your book and I've read some of other Wim's book, but your book really isn't just about Wim Hof Method, but you sort of use him as a springboard to these unlocking these superhuman powers, maybe that we consider superhuman, but they're within all of us. And
yeah, they're not superpowers; they're human powers. Like that's why this book is not titled "What Doesn't Kill Us: How Freezing Water, Extreme Altitude, and Environmental Conditioning Will Make You Freaking Superhuman." No, these are just things that we have in us. It's an innate biology, and we're able to wake them up. And it doesn't have to be just the Wim Hof method. I mean, I look at lots of different examples in the book on how you can do very similar things. I find Wim fascinating because he opens the door to it. He's a very efficient and fast way to do this stuff. But these are things that he discovered on his own and that you can discover on your own as well. And everyone who does the method actually does it a little bit differently. If you've been hanging out in this community, I like to say that the Wim Hof method really isn't a method as much as it is a set of principles or guidelines. And there's like these concepts that he puts in that then you can expand and do really cool stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, you came down from, I believe it's Mount Śnieżka. Is that how you pronounce it in Poland? Śnieżka in Poland, and it's something that it sounds like from reading some accounts that you can actually take a lift to get to the top of this or something like that. Or is there?
Yeah, it's a ski hill.
Okay, so so you guys hike up the ski hill, and at the top there's people all dressed in their like Gore-Tex ski outfits, and you're up there in shorts and in a backpack.
There's this time where all of these like blonde Swedish girls in like one piece cottony, things are skiing down, and they all stop like, oh my God. And we get photos of all these bare chested dudes hanging out with the Swedish kid. It was awesome. But yeah, I mean, the thing is that they're so surprised because the normal thing that people do when they want to get out, when they go out into the cold, is they try to keep their body temperature and everything stationary, in static, from their home to the outside, because they don't want that brief feeling.
Yeah.
Right. And so you layer up too much. And you do obstacle course races. The listeners here do obstacle course races, and you all know that when you're working hard, you are heating up. And if you're layered up in fleece, and from your 70-degree house or your 80-degree house, whatever you keep it at, and you try to stay at the same temperature outside, you're going to boil up, and you want to like shed layers. So, one of the things I recommend is like you should go for runs in your skivvies. Like you go wear a bathing suit and sneakers and go on a run in the winter, and just realize that you are going to generate heat. And not only you're going to generate heat, but that cold is going to send signals to your nervous system, because there's all these nerves on your skin, and they connect through your central core area and go up into your brain, and they trigger all of these really great hormonal and physiological responses that you don't get if you're all layered up.
Yeah, so I guess you came off that mountain, you got done with that week, and all of a sudden, I remember in the book you say that you lost 7 pounds in 7 days, which probably some
Oprah,
of it...
Why aren't you calling me? Oprah.
So, I mean, this sort of, it seems like it set you on this whirlwind, like, world adventure, almost like an Odyssey. It was like your own version of the Odyssey. So without giving away the whole book or whatnot, but kind of tell us some of the highlights and stops you had along the way, and things that you learned.
Well, I ended up training with a lot of inspiring and great endurance athletes. Laird Hamilton, the most famous surfer in the world. I hang out and do his pool routine where he does these like underwater weightlifting sessions. And then he also has his own version of the Wim breathing with sprints and ice baths. I hung out with Brian MacKenzie, who's one of the foremost proponents and actually creators of the high-intensity interval training. I went to the U.S. Arium, which is I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's the Army's Environmental Research Unit. How do they train soldiers they do the scientific research to see how soldiers can perform at extreme altitude or extreme cold or extreme heat. I do a lot of just crazy adventures with Wim. I'm hanging out with anthropologists trying to understand what our physiology is all about. I mean, it really is. It was a blast. I'm a writer because I love adventure, right? I'm a writer because I want to have a really cool life, come out with really cool stories, and I like getting my hands dirty. I mean, the mud runners understand what that's about, right? And I view my job as this sort of a great privilege and great fun, and I put that forward in the book as well. Yeah,
and you intersect with the obstacle racing industry, and I love in the book you actually say OCR as well.
Yeah, right. I was trained by Scott Canali. This I don't know if your people know him.
Everybody knows Rise of the Sufferfest.
It's on my social media everywhere, guys. Just tell him to shut up, right? Is that more or less people's feeling? Hi, Scott.
So you intersected with obstacle racing. You first did at least in the book, you first talk about going to a Spartan race. So do you want to talk about how obstacle racing played into this whole journey that you went on?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about obstacle races, which is so cool, is that people are getting outside their comfort zones. They're doing natural movements. Like these are things that you might do if you were living, not exactly, not barbed wire and electricity and blah, blah, blah. But the idea is that you're trying to overcome challenges. It's not like a systematic weight routine or something that's sort of contrived and scientifically modulated. I like to think of like the OCR community, and actually a lot of the stuff in the book, as sort of that. You remember that Rocky movie where Rocky fights the Russian, the blonde?
Yeah, and he goes
Russian?
Works out in the barn.
Yeah, right. And the Russian is like getting steroids, and he's like scientists like tracking him, and he's like, just over the top scientific. And that's how I view like the gym industry, how it's sort of developed in America. And then there's Rocky, who's like, I'm gonna lift carts in the barn, and I'm in the snow, and I'm rolling in it, and I've got this human power. And that's sort of where I see the heart and the soul of the OCR industry is that it's fun, it's raw. There's no like one way to do it. It's like the way you figure out how to do it. And I love that about OCRs. And I did 2 for the book. I did a Spartan race and Tough Guy in the UK, which is the coldest, best, whatever you want to call that one. It was great. And I mean, I'm not an OCR runner in general. Like my philosophy in almost everything I do is like, hey, that looks like a blast. Let's try it. And I think I did a sprint, which is like the short mini race. And at the end of it, I was like, oh, I wish I did a longer one because this is sort of like a little easy. So, so at the end of the chapter, when I'm talking about the Spartan race, I do some stuff, and all of your people, all of you guys who are listening, know what it's like. And I'm like, I wish I had done something that challenged me a little bit more.
You did do the Breckenridge. I have to say, you did do the Breckenridge Spartan, and I believe it was 2015. Is that when you did that one?
That sounds right.
Yeah, so there was snow on course. I mean, so you did. So for a lot of people, that was one of the harder, that aren't conditioned to the cold like you are. That the elevation in that snow and the cold was a factor for, I know, a lot of people at that race.
Oh yeah, I'm hardcore, man. Yeah, totes. I mean, then I did after doing the Spartan race. I trained for another 6 months doing Wim Hof stuff. And I did Tough Guy, which is the coldest, hypothermia-inducing, blah, 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 race. And I did it in just shorts. I was shirtless. Oh, let me see if I can find a photo of me doing it. Yeah, here it is. Wait, I'm going to put this to the screen. You see that? There's me on that race. That was my outfit. And, the year before, 300 people ended up with hypothermia. And I was smiling and burning up the whole time.
Yeah, and I think everybody sort of knew you were this crazy American there that was smiling the whole time. Didn't even Mr. Mouse say something to you about like the fact that it was James Appleton said to you like, you're the only one smiling on this whole course.
Yeah, and you know what? The only thing I regret about doing Tough Guy was that I didn't have an American flag Speedo, and I was hoping I've looked into this now, and you can buy an American flag Speedo. And next time, if they do it again, which I bet they will, I'm gonna have an American flag Speedo on, and it's gonna be great.
Yeah, and I think I mean for me as well, it's interesting that as I read your book, like your journey is similar to mine in a lot of ways, where I came into this whole thing pretty skeptical. Like it was introduced to me, and I said, okay, yeah, whatever. Like one person can do this. But what changed my mind, I think, out of this whole idea of that starting to control our bodies was when Wim did the study. And I never say that it's like the University
endotoxin.
The endotoxin, but is it the University of Radboud or how?
Radboud.
Yeah.
In Nijmegen.
Yeah. So, do you want to talk about that endotoxin? Because I think that is, for a lot of people that are more on the science track, I think that's kind of a turning point as to, maybe I'll look into this whole thing.
Yeah. So Wim has done all these crazy things. He's able to sit in the ice and control his body temperature, and they put a rectal probe in him to sort of show that his body temperature rose in the ice instead of declined. And that was all very cool. But then he made this claim that he could consciously turn off or turn up his immune system at will, which is at the point thought physiologically impossible. There's no mental connection between the immune system and the brain. But he said he could do it, and so these immunologists over at Radboud University in Nijmegen, there you go, got it, named Dr. Peter Pickers and Matthias Cox. What they did is devised a test to see if he was right, and the test originally exists for testing cyclosporin and other sort of immunosuppressants, which are used if you get like a kidney transplant. Your body will usually reject the kidney, and it'll eat up the kidney, and so what they need to do is turn off your immune system in order that you can keep the kidney around. So the way you test those drugs is you give someone the drug and then inject them with this heat-killed E. coli bacteria, which is called endotoxin, which in 99% of normal people, you get injected with it and you get a fever, your runny nose, you have like all of the primary responses until your body figures out that it was been tricked, and then it says, it gives the big middle finger, and then it reverts to normal. Now, Wim said that he could do basically the same thing as taking an immunosuppressant, but with his mind. So
Which
they
sounds
said, yeah,
super woo-woo. Like if you know nothing about this sounds like so woo-woo. And saying you can control your autonomic nervous system, any doctor is going to say that's impossible.
Yeah, the definition of autonomic means you don't freaking control it. It's like automatic, right? So, and actually, a lot of stuff on this journey ends up sounding woo-woo, and I am like allergic to a lot of it. But you got to keep testing it, and some of this works out. So they injected him with endotoxin. He was supposed to get a fever, and he was like, "Oh no, I feel fine. I just have a minor headache." And that was all he said. And then they did they were doing blood tests and doing all these things, and his blood actually remained resistant to endotoxin even after it was extracted out of his body, and it remained that way for 3 days afterwards. So it was like shocking. And there was this big journal article that was like, look at this crazy shit. And then some scientists saw this study, and they're like, well, wait a minute. Wim's probably a genetic freak. Remember I said 99% of people don't react in a predictable way, but 1% are able to resist or don't have that reaction. So that's a totally fair scientific assessment. So what they did is a year later, Pickers and Cox gathered 18 volunteers, 6 people in a control group, 12 in an active group, and they took those 12 guys and they put them through Wim's Poland training, the same one that I did in Poland. Actually, they were there the week after I was reporting on the Playboy story.
Uh-huh.
Same winter. After that, they brought them all back to Radboud and injected them all with endotoxin, and they repeated the same results. Now, that journal article has been the one that everyone is now looking at, because not only what it proved is that not only was Wim really interesting, and look, he could suppress his immune system, but that he can teach it and that it's generalizable. And that is, and there's still ongoing research, but that is like the key, because if you can suppress your immune system, then what does that mean for autoimmune illnesses like arthritis or lupus or Crohn's disease, where you have lesions from your mouth to your butt? And what the implications are, and what I've seen personally from interviews and meeting people, is that many folks are able to reverse autoimmune illnesses by doing stuff like the Wim Hof method, this breathing, this conscious focus, this ice baths and that sort of stuff. And it's amazing. And there's a lot of now science coming out saying, hey, let's go investigate this. Of course, pharmaceutical companies are like, well, wait, ice is super cheap.
And breathing. You can breathe. You don't need anything to breathe.
and it's also interesting. I have this like beautiful thing right now where I have a fellowship over at CU Boulder,
mm-hmm.
and part of the fellowship is I get to audit any class I want. And I took last semester an immunology course, and doctors are super great at saying what's going on during autoimmune illnesses. Like they're like, this macrophage goes over and eats that stuff, and it goes through this bodily system, and they get the details, and they totally understand how this works. But when you ask them what causes an autoimmune illness, like what's the cause, they're like, it's some sort of environmental factor, but we don't know. They don't know what causes it, and like that's just baffling to me. It's like, okay, so we know that once we're down this path, how things work, and there's no like investigation. So it's probably lifestyle. It's probably the fact that we don't have temperature variation in our lives. Not all of them, but many of them, right? Is that we live at 72 degrees year in, year out. Snowstorm outside, crank up the thermostat. Scorching hot, hey, I got air conditioning. Our species is 200,000 years old. That's Homo sapiens sapien. That's your pasty-skinned office mate next door to you, has the same exact biology as that prehistoric caveman who was like hunting antelope and whatever he was doing with his time. And before that, there was also 3 billion years of human of evolution in general, where biological creatures in general have to deal with a changing environment, and mm-hmm. they have a biology that has to deal with a changing environment. And those changes, that variation was taken for granted by our biology. The biology was like, okay, we know this is going to happen, and it responds to it, and sort of like there's this give and take between your skin and your insides and the world that you inhabit. And only for the last blink of an evolutionary eye, 150 years, which is nothing evolutionary. That's what, 2, 3 generations, 4 generations maybe?
It's nothing.
Like that is nothing. And so what we've done is we've extracted ourselves from the environment. We've extracted ourselves from nature, and that is making us weak.
Yeah, and it's funny how I was having a conversation about this actually we're interviewing, there's this show on Discovery, The Wheel, and I'm talking to one of the contestants every week, and we were talking after we finished recording, and we were saying it's funny today, like what you did and what the book has and what a lot of people are doing with looking at dietary, like all of a sudden dietary fat is not so, like we thought for the last 40 years it was bad. Now they're like, oh wait, I think we were kind of wrong on that one. Mm-hmm. But it's funny. It's like and I don't really like to use the word paleo because that word's been bastardized so much at this point, but it's like we're doing all these things to get back to what was epigenetically just normal. Like we're supposed to be in extremes. Like I talked to my mom yesterday on the phone trying to explain all this to her for the first time in a couple of weeks, and she's like, "You're doing what? Like you're taking 10-minute cold showers right now? Like why? Isn't that cold? Like you have hypothermia in your past." I'm like, "It's cold, but I've taught myself through breathing and like focus to not shake, especially those last 3 minutes of they're cold." I mean, our water temperature is like 43 degrees right now. It's cold. I mean, it's winter.
Yeah, it's super chilly. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like, this is one of my favorite stories that I just touch on in the book. Yep. So, we're Americans, and our founding myth is these like religious pilgrims, coming out of the UK, sail on their little boats, and they land in Cape Cod, and they don't meet anybody because who wants to hang out with a smelly Englishman, and who's like religiously Puritan, right? And so they're hanging on Cape Cod and they're freezing in their little huts or whatever they have, and they don't see anyone until like February or March when this guy walks into their camp wearing just a loincloth, and it's cold. This is Cape Cod cold. This is like frigid. He walks into their camp and he says, "Welcome, Englishmen. Do you have any beer?" Which is crazy how much he misjudged these Puritans, right? I mean, of course they didn't have beer. But the Puritans, the first thing they did is like, "Oh my God, you must be so cold. Here, have a coat." And Samoset, the guy's name. He's like, "Yeah, sure. Thanks for the coat. Are you sure you don't have beer?" And the reason why the story is interesting is because his winter outfit was a loincloth, and he was totally fine hanging out in this like very minimal clothing. And it's because the Wampanoag, the Algonquin Indians in that area would put their babies out in the snow throughout their childhood for like 15 minutes, not like all day, but for 15 minutes to get their bodies acclimatized to the heat. And that resistance that they built up, their ability to generate heat, continued their whole lives. And there's so many actually native population first contact reports which are similar to this, where these explorers and people are shocked at how little clothing people are wearing around the world despite harsh conditions. And it's this penchant for comfort that we have in Western culture that is now spread all across the planet, which is it's alluring, right? We all like being comfortable, but it's also stunting our sort of innate hidden biology.
Yeah, and I think the other fascinating point is that in that story that you write about as well is also, and it's kind of a tangent as well, is the fact that the settler, the pilgrims were like, "Here, take this coat," not wondering, how do you speak English?
Right. Well, no, they also wondered that, yeah, right. English, really? He learned English because he had been Samoset had been kidnapped by English sailors as a child. I think he was up in Maine at the time, and the English sailors were cod fishermen. I don't know why they kidnapped him, slavery or whatever. But he worked on the boat for a while, and that's how he knew English. And that's probably also why he was like, "Yeah, I'll go check out these English guys, see what's up with them."
Yeah,
it's sort of it's a pretty funny and weird story for sure.
Yeah, and I just think I have to say, kind of circling back to the book and whatnot, I think, I'd read, and you mentioned it in your book, that Wim Hof and this kid, Justin Rosales, wrote this book, Becoming the Iceman, which is kind of hilarious. This college kid just like Wim's like, go do this, and he's like, okay, and he goes this, does all this stuff. But it's an entertaining book. But I like that your book comes at it from more the scientific point of view. It's not just Wim. It's like you're looking at this whole like adaptation of our bodies and whatnot. So, I mean, from your kind of journey that you went on, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's sort of 3 pillars in a way. Like, I hate to make this sound so like, this is what you do, this is what you do, because everybody's body's a little bit different. But it seems like that to sort of maximize and jump into some of these like primal things that we can do, it's a combination of like the breathing, some sort of breathing, whether you do it like Laird style, Wim style, your style, like Tumo for those that kind of know, like the Tibetan monks. Like there's a breathing component, there's a meditation component that we haven't really talked about, and then of course there's the cold component. Is that kind of what you saw, that it's kind of those 3? Like if you kind of ignore one of them, you're not really going into the whole thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's so many ways into this, and to say that there is one only, I think is inaccurate. And this is why I like to think of the Wim Hof method as more like the Wim Hof guidelines. I think that the when you talk about the Wim Hof method, it's 3 things. It's mental focus, it's the breathing method, and it's cold exposure. And those 3 mixed together work well because in the breathing, you're pushing your body to this gasp reflex, right? And I use this concept in the book called the wedge, where you get to a place where your autonomic response, it can be triggered, but you still have the ability to resist it. And I use the metaphor of a sneeze. Like, you know how you do that. You're going to sneeze. And like, you can stop yourself from sneezing. Or if you happen to be a ticklish person and I tickle you, you can say, I'm not ticklish, and you can resist it. Now, that's like where this autonomic and the mental thing, part of your physiology meet. And if you can delay a sneeze or delay a tickle, or in the cold, delay a shiver, or stop that tensing up, you're growing this thing that I call the wedge, which becomes generalized around the body. So the reason why the breathing is interesting, you don't need to do the breathing in the shower at the same time, right? You can do them separated by hours. It's totally fine. But with the breathing, you're trying to push that gasp point, that point where your body has to like, you have to exhale carbon dioxide and take a breath, and you're just telling your body, no, I can hold on a little longer, until you don't, and you take your breath, and it's fine. But you're extending that thing, and that modulates the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight and flight responses. And when you do the cold, it's the same thing. Like, you stay in the cold and you relax in the cold, which is the opposite of what your body wants to do. And then when you do that, your body says, what it doesn't do is like, okay, I give up, let's die. Like, it doesn't do that. It says, okay, you're relaxing. I guess I can't depend on the brain to go tense up and use muscle activity to warm me up. I'm going to switch to a metabolic program. And that is where you start sucking white fat from your system and using that to heat yourself in the stove of brown fat. And we can get all into the mechanics of that if you want to, but let's not, because it's sort of complex. But essentially,
read the book, right? Read the book, because you go into it a ton in the book. And if you're into the kind of geekier, sciencey part, or you want to learn about how cold exposure can actually help you lose weight, read about brown fat or brown adipose tissue. I like to call it brown adipose tissue, even because the only reason I like to call it that is because when you say brown fat, people, that 3-letter word has such a weird connotation to it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
but
you can call it whatever you call it, like the bacon, for all I care. Like, and everyone loves bacon, so they'll get it, right? But it's we have the ability to heat our bodies in multiple ways. What scientists call thermogenesis, which means like starting heat, right? And And usually we use our muscles, we use our digestive system, and we use our circulatory system to keep our body temperature up, because that's easiest for the body. And we store white fat essentially for winter. Because we live at 72 degrees all year long, we live actually in summer all year long. Because we have electric lighting, we live in summer light conditions all year long, where the days are really long. Well, that's your electric light. Your body hasn't evolved to know what electricity is. It's like, okay, there's some light, and that messes with your sleep patterns and other things that I go into a little bit in the book. But I've lost what I was saying. I totally forgot. I was going to just start going on to something else, and I was like, no, they're gonna hear that I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. I've lost it. Where was I going?
I think you were just talking about the fact that we can
brown fat,
but without going into all the detail about brown fat. But basically, white visceral fat, the stuff that is around your gut from drinking too much beer or whatever, that gets eaten up by brown fat. And the more time you spend in the cold, right, you get more brown fat. Sort of, right?
You should. Well, actually, let's not delve into the science. You might get more brown fat. You might also get to some other stuff too. But what you're essentially doing, and this is where I was going before, is that winter is your body wants to sort of like hibernate. It wants to get ready for winter and use your white fat stores, not for the energy to move your muscles or keep you from starving. I mean, it will do that under duress, but it's actually holding on to it to burn directly for heat energy. So that white fat serves as both an insulative purpose and as a fuel source to heat you up. And this is why I lost weight so quickly in Poland, is because it was cold all the time. Wim keeps his house off, and so my body had to use its own internal stores to lose weight. So if you're getting a pot belly or you have a spare tire around your waist, cold is the best way to lose that for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's a funny story, and my fiance was like, "Is there anything you want me to talk to Scott about?" And he was like, "Well, talk about this." And then he said, "No, you don't have to." But I think it's actually, it talks about a greater thing. You took a shower the second time you went to go see Wim, I believe. You took a shower and you managed to flood Wim's house, basically.
Yeah,
you flooded the bathroom, and Wim comes running in, which I can only imagine how, scary it was to have.
No, I didn't flood the bathroom.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I did. No,
okay.
I did. So what happens is, and it's funny because no one's ever asked this in an interview. I've done 50 interviews. You're the first person to put this up. So in the morning I went out and swammed. I went into the pool, which is freezing, and I swam around for a while, and then I came back in and I took a hot shower because why not? I was going to do that. Don't judge me. And I was warming up, and his bathroom. And this is a brand new house he just bought to sort of become a training center. He bought it the week before, and so I'm in the shower, and because his house is usually a mess, everything's always chaotic around Wim. The drain wasn't very well created, right? And so it clogged, and there's just one drain in the middle of the bathroom floor. It's a little bit different setup than we have in America, and so the floor flooded. And I wasn't noticing it. And then it flooded out of the tile and then into the hallway, which is not sealed. And then it went into the subfloor and filled up that, and then started leaking through his ceiling with these big droplets of rain. And I'm going to collapse his freaking house, right? And so I'm standing in the shower, just, washing whatever. And Wim barges in, and I'm like, oh shit, he knows I've turned the hot water on. And he's like, turn off the shower. And sure, he runs into my shower, and I'm naked, and he turns it off, and he's like, he tells me what's going on, and I'm like, oh my god, I've ruined your house. And so we go downstairs, and there's these giant water droplets coming from dripping on his guitar, dripping on his couch, dripping everywhere, and I feel pretty bad about it. And then Wim, being the crazy guy that he is, right, should be angry by any rights. I would be furious if you did that damage to my house. But he just says, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's raining in my house. And he's such a weird guy, but also he's not caught up by the materiality of this worldwide fame that he's started. He's really in it just to live it. And it's something I admire so much in him, because he has more generosity than I will ever have, just innate in him. And it was just sort of a way to illustrate the personality that has come up around him.
Yeah, and so there was another piece that I kind of took when I read that story too, and maybe this is kind of reading in my own obstacle racing experience as well, and stories of, I've been in this industry for 8 years now, which is crazy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but
You're so young.
no, I mean 8 years to be in anything is a while these days. But what I feel like is that experience. It's like Wim has put himself into all of these extreme situations. So these little things in life that, like we could totally freak out about them, or, it's like you drop, you drop your glass and it breaks on the floor. You can either sit there and start swearing at it and like cursing and just be pissed off, or you can just say, okay, that happened. All right, we'll clean it up, and well, maybe I get a new glass now. It's like, and I think in obstacle racing I've seen is that it's that sort of thing. It's like when people overcome, for them, getting over that 8-foot wall, they might as well be climbing Everest. It's jumping over that fire, even though, as it's one of the easiest things. I can't tell you how many people over the years I've seen just stand there and stop, because their whole life they've been told, don't jump over fire, don't play with fire.
Interesting.
And then all of a sudden, I've seen it translate into people's work lives where they go, oh, well, I went under that dunk wall at that race, or, oh, I did, like a world's toughest mudder in the middle of a sandstorm. So I can ask my boss for that raise that I've been deserving for like six years, like forever, whatever. Or like it sort of dulls down the rest of life. And I don't know if that was the case with Wim, or he's just a little bit, that's just his personality is like a little bit out there. But to me, it kind of was like, if he can swim under ice and have his retinas freeze.
Yeah. What is a little bit of water in his subfloor? I mean, this training, I think Wim has always been a little outside the bounds. So I don't know. I can't speak exactly to how he has changed because of this. I didn't know him before. But I will say it does put things in perspective. And there's this concept that is, getting traction in the world right now of resilience. And what makes someone able to endure hardships? And if you're in traffic and the guy cuts you off and you have to like jiggle your wheel a little bit, like that can set people off into a fury. Or you can be like, they'll still probably get there on time, And we have this issue in America of being stressed out about really small things and forgetting what the actual stakes in the world are. And I would say that this training helps put things in perspective, but so does obstacle course racing. So does facing challenges in general, because the unchallenged life, a person who never challenges themselves, even small things feel to them like really big things. Like I don't know how many of your listeners are worried about their 401ks or their retirement benefits, and there are things that are very serious to think about those things. I don't want to diminish the importance of taking care of yourself when you're older but you can invest so much into these like little things that you forget to live in the moment and you forget to be a human. And you're not your 401k. You are not your job. You are a giant hairless ape, and get used to it, right? And you have your hairless ape life that you get to live, and isn't that great? And why not live it? Why not go out there and see what your hairless ape physiology is able to do? It can do stuff.
I love it. And we asked like our sort of community if they had any questions. Some may have read the book, some may haven't, but we got a couple of really good questions. And one of them is interesting. And I know this person, when I shared about Wim a couple of years ago in World's Toughest Mudder community, he jumped right on it and started taking cold showers for months, knowing that this race, because it's 24 hours, it's cold. Like you're in and out of water, hypothermia can set in really easily. So he said, do you think that the method, so I guess we'll expand this outside of just Wim's, but just this idea of the different methods that conditioning that you explored is a dial into our primal instincts of survival, or is it more distracting our bodies and our minds from recognizing that we're actually cold?
Both, actually. I mean, and what's the difference in some ways, right? And what is cold? I mean, there's actually a lot of questions that come up in there at once. Cold is just a stimulus, right? And what might be cold for you is turning your thermostat down to 71 from 72 because you're so not used to changes. So that might be cold for you.
We're 59.
Yeah, great. But that's not dangerous, right?
Yeah,
that's
no.
not a dangerous thing. So distracting from cold, sure, right? Because the cold is really a mental thing. Now distracting from fatal hypothermia and frostbite, no, you're not distracting yourself from that. You will pay attention when that happens. But it's giving you resilience and tools to deal with it, because the body is not, if it's not exposed to a lot of variation, it starts ringing the panic bells very early, because it's like, well, I've never done this before. This must suck. And so what you're doing is giving variation to unlock sort of a primal, I don't even know if primal is the word, just natural variation that we are capable of. And if you take someone who's only been in comfort their whole life, and they're now 40, and you dunk them in ice water for 10 minutes, they might die. Like, they might actually die. And the reason for that is because they have no referent, and their body's like, what the hell is going on? They have no ability, they've developed no metabolism to deal with it, and aka death, fatal. But if you do somebody who's trained their body, a slow incline up into getting to that 10-minute ice bath, they're not going to have nearly as much trouble, right? I mean, they could die if they drown, but they're going to be able to maintain their body temperature because they're going up in easy stages, and then the body is capable of at least doing what Wim's does, right? Because Wim has a body, right? And Wim can do 92 minutes in the ice, and there's no reason that a human can't. He is human, right? You can get up to that, and maybe more, or maybe your personal limit is not quite that, but it's a lot higher than you might expect.
Awesome. So before I let you go, I love to sort of, with the podcast that I have over on Dirt in Your Skirt, I love to always, the people I interview there, end with, if somebody's listening to this, obviously pick up the book, read the book, number one, right? Read the book. But if somebody kind of wants to get a jump start and they were listening to this and they're like, okay, well, maybe Scott and Margaret aren't crazy. What do you think is sort of a good little dip your feet in? I know you've written about this in Outside magazine, but what's kind of that first little
Men's Journal.
Men's Journal. What's that first step to sort of, ease your way into this whole world
thing? There's two really easy methods, right? To just start seeing what your body can do, which is take a shower, wash. Easy so far, right? Super easy. Warm. All right. Now turn to the back of the shower and do the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life, and turn that knob to cold, which really is hard. It's not I'm not. This is really hard to do because you're like, oh, I was warm though, and then sit in that cold and then relax. Just chill, and it can be hard at first because your response could be very strong, but you can do it. I promise you. And relax there and just feel that cold, and then realize, I don't know, you probably swam in the ocean at some point, and you realize when you first got in it was cold because you tiptoed in, and then eventually you jumped in, and then you swam around and it was all right. You're gonna get to that same spot, and do that. That's really do that. That's the entry point that you can do every morning. Do it first thing, and then you'll get this great rush. When you get out, you'll be like, oh, everything's sort of easier today, and I feel like a glow. That will totally happen. Another thing that I recommend to people is going, if it's winter, going on a run outside with just your skivvies on, or if you're a woman, sports bra, and shoes, and go for a run in this really not very much clothing. And just realize that the first minute or two is going to be cold, and then you're going to build up some internal heat. Or if you really want to be prepared, you can do some push-ups before you go out. So you've already built up some heat. Go for a mile or two in like 30-degree weather or 20-degree weather. I mean, in a place where you can look at a frostbite table if you want. You can just Google frostbite table and you can see, well, I can stay out for 30 minutes before frostbite might be a danger. Okay, so do 29 minutes and you're going to be all right. And you're going to generate so much heat anyway, because when you run, you generate heat and you will be warm, that you're going to realize this is great. And what's really cool, what's happening is that your nerves, even though you're generating internal heat, the nerves on your skin are getting those messages saying it's winter and winter is coming. And therefore, I'm going to have to go get ready for this. And your body starts to adapt super quickly. And it's more or less painless to do. And, I climbed up Mount Kilimanjaro. I made it to Gilman's Point, which is about 18,500 feet. I was in a bathing suit almost the whole way up. You can too. It got down to negative 30 at times. So use that as a guidepost of where you might be like. I'm not saying Kilimanjaro is what you need to do, but that's a good start. Now, if you want to do more, learn the Wim Hof breathing, because it's really quite simple. I do about 15 minutes a day of it. You can do more. You don't need to. And read the book, and there's just stuff to think about. And remember, these are guidelines. The big the headline here is that the environment is important, and the environment you inhabit and your relation to it is important, and you should not take it for granted.
Well, Scott, thanks so much. This has been great, and it's been great chatting with you, and I love what you just said there with the environment, because it's so important. So thanks again.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, and keep mud running.